Let's begin, and I guess the people outside will start coming in once we start with our discussion. So, earlier in part one, we talked about how investors can reduce, their exposure and thereby accept more risk. So, just to go one by one, we talked about how Manavia, through ADB's collaboration, was able to offer working capital loans to SMEs, whereas before they were just focusing on MFIs. The second was Ms. Claudine Emmett talked about crowdfunding and how that enabled them to offer 0% interest loans, which honestly is unheard of before. And then Mr. Sandeep Giri talked about how by enforcing standards, you can aggregate projects and thereby hit the minimum ticket size limit of regional investors. And finally, Mr. Rajat Arora talked about how they have a program to field experts to supplement the management team of startups in their portfolio and thereby reduce the risk of not having that particular skill set when it's critical to the operation. So that's the finance side. Now we move to the project developer side. All right. Now, let's play up a scenario. Let's say you're a clean energy startup. You got your Series A funding, and now you want to scale up. And the investor is then asking you, can you quantify how many villagers or households you can connect to your mini grid in the next 3 years? Now, being a clean energy startup, you don't have enough, overhead, capital to finance all that overhead to do a very, one-on-one, checking of all the houses to field people in off-grid areas. So we invited Stuart to share his mapping initiative, and we'd like him to share how, by visualizing energy supply and demand through maps, you can actually answer this question. So, Stuart, you can actually speak from there. And so Stuart is from Village Infrastructure.
Good morning. Alrighty. So thanks a lot for coming this morning. And I'm Stuart Crane from Village Infrastructure, and previously I've been on the ground helping people get solar and micro hydro and other technologies over the last 15 years with various hats on at the time. This recent work has been made possible by UN Foundation, where I'm the chair of the working group for mapping in a voluntary context, and financial support from ADB over the years to get some of this data together, which is why it's a bit richer data set for Asia and a little less for Africa. We have been trying to help stakeholders with free tools. This is all completely free tools available online. Just email me at stuart@villageinfrastructure.org for the URLs. But what we've been trying to do is to give more detail, more granular detail of where these markets are and how to develop them. In my wind farming days, with another hat on 15 years ago, we used similar GIS mapping technologies. Find out where the windy spots are, find out where the transmission lines are, the roads, where are the endangered bird corridors, things like that. And that led us to literally commercially viable wind farm sites to develop. And I subsequently drank a lot of cups of tea talking to the farmers. So taking a similar approach, we've also been looking at the energy access issues. And there's a lot of renewable energy data out there, but not necessarily the data about who is off-grid and where are they. So this tries to help give a bit more information about that. So this was our starting point about 5 years ago, with the International Energy Agency giving some very aggregated numbers that I'm sure we've all seen about 50 million times. And not a lot of change expected, particularly in Africa, over the next 30 years. So hopefully we can do something to reduce that forecast. The first problem on that first slide was that question mark on the right-hand side. Out of the tabular data of what we had from the IEA, they'd missed the entire Pacific region, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Vanuatu. And as an Australian, that's our back door that we want to see that data in. So we had to fill in a lot of the gaps that the IEA had left out to obtain a first completely global national data set of percentage access to electricity. But then percentage access to electricity is not the only game in town. You also want to know how many people in certain countries. And so that gives you an idea of the percentage access of electricity in Asia, but at a subnational level, not just national statistics. So first we start with national statistics, and we've created the first data set here that covers all of Asian countries in one package. We had to sift through about 20 or 30 different PDF documents to find the subnational statistics and bring them all into one area. So that's the first step of granularity. And then you cross-multiply that by the population in each of those subnational areas, and you start to see the absolute number of people. But then you don't want them spread all over huge land areas as well, so the population density of people without access gives another picture of the equation. Then you can go deeper than subnational statistics, getting away from just state level stuff, right down into, say, 6,000 administrative areas of India, and deeper still after that. So we're constantly working on trying to increase the granularity of the data that we've got. On top of that, you need to know what resources you have to work with. It may be the natural resources, or also where are the industry players actually functional around the world, or where are the World Bank energy projects or ADB energy projects. All of that we're trying to map in one location, and there's now 500 data layers with 2 million data points, with both global and national and subnational data available for free. Philippines is a good example here. We've got multiple layers there, including 30,000 school locations. If you want to develop power stations around schools, it's taking off, and a data set of over 30,000 village locations. Then we really hit the rubber on the road. 15 years ago, I went out to Nepali villages and had to measure up the village by hand. Out there with measuring tape, pair of hiking boots, and measure up all the house-to-house distances. You don't have to do that anymore. With the imagery that you've got from Google satellite imagery, you can actually see most of the villages in remote areas without having to fly out there. You can measure up your mini-grid, and we've developed a tool that gives you the latitude and longitude coordinate of any house in any village in any country if the imagery is good enough at a very low cost of about 10 cents per household. When you're spending $100 per household, that's only 0.1% of your budget. So it should be an affordable feasibility tool, and we can do the first ones for free. This is new data. The data of where poor people exist, are living, it didn't exist before. So we're hoping to create a massive public database of 100, 200 million off-grid households. So everybody in the industry and even non-energy development workers can work on that. Here's an example where we mapped 10,000 households in central Sumba in Indonesia, and then on the bottom right there overlaid where the grid exists and what the percentage of solar was in different areas. We have recently also developed a tool to connect all of these household locations into a grid network with a mathematically least length of lines. So it's called a minimum spanning tree in mathematical speak, but basically this auto-designs mini-grid systems without having to manually do it. So we're trying to speed up the design process and make it cheaper. A quick way of doing it is also just putting a buffer around households. You know, if households are 10 or 20 or 30 metres apart, you'll probably connect them with wire. If they're 500 metres apart, you probably won't. So as you create a buffer around the households, you can see grids actually form by where those households are overlapping. We're also trying to visualise the investment pitch from villages. So this is a Kiva investment pitch, and by actually getting villages online, that allows them to actually get access to finance. These were funded within 4 hours of getting online. That's a little bit faster than ADB processes, but of course the number's a little bit smaller too. So more of these would be great. If we can visualise our projects online, the funders may actually be out there in the crowds. So seeing the real situation in the villages is very important to communicate to some of these investors, the agro-processing as well as the lighting and the solutions around them as well. But in Vanuatu, things have changed. It's not all rosy stuff and everything sails along smoothly. We've had a massive volcano. There is a volcano there, but the cyclone was a real problem. 300 km/h winds absolutely decimated the project. So in Indonesia as well, we recently had cooking fires, burned down about 4 households, including some of the solar assets that we had there. And the woman entrepreneur who was running that solar power station gave birth 3 days later. So bringing some of these real visual images of what energy access projects is like can help with the planning, but also help to convey the stories of what happens out there and possibly help manage the assets in the long term as well.
Thank you, Stu. Just one question about the mapping. So you use Google Maps to plot the households individually. How accurate have the results been, and how usable is it for clean energy companies or mini grid companies who want to probably provide a solution to those households? Can you comment on that?
Often the imagery might be between 1 and 3 years old. That's free. You can also buy imagery from more recent passes. For example, within hours or days of the cyclone going over Vanuatu, imagery came up of the impact there. Some was free, some was you need to purchase. So sometimes there are new households built in the area that you've just mapped, but generally more than 95% accurate. So you're always going to complement the desktop data with field data eventually, but you can get out of the starting gates a lot faster this way.
Right. Thank you. So our next speaker is Mr. Sanjoy Sanyal. So his work is complementary to what Stuart is doing, and what Sanjoy is basically doing is that he's getting government data and trying to reconcile them with the map, for example, that Stuart is making. So maybe Sanjoy, you can provide more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Coy. Thank you, Coy. Thank you, Stuart. So first of all, let me explain why we did this. Well, as New Ventures, most of our work is actually facilitating deals with investors and investing companies. Now, when typically these investment decisions start, they start with the same question Coy posed at the beginning of the session, which is, this is investment dollar of $1 million, but how much can you scale up? Can you scale up pan-India? Where is your next 20 locations going to be, and so on and so forth. Our exercise was really started not so much as a mapping exercise, though it has morphed into that, but it really started as to provide concrete evidence of what is market sizes in the specific areas that clean energy access companies work in, and how they can exploit those specific markets. Now, and again, just to sort of explain the way we thought about it at the beginning, we, in conferences like this or in meetings, meeting after meeting, energy access companies quote the example of mobile telecom. That mobile telecom penetrated and sort of disrupted the market. Fixed line phones, governments could never make fixed line phones available. At the same time, mobile telephony by private entrepreneurs penetrated all these markets, and that's where clean energy access companies need to go to. So what we did was we started with having some interviews of mobile telecom executives who went to the same business school that I did, and many years back, and over beers which I had to buy, of course. They told me that look and I posed the question, so how do you know where to expand? How do you know where to put your tower? And the question that came back simply is, we would place a tower where people can have the ability to buy a mobile phone, where the people have the ability to pay for airtime. And so we have to, in rural areas, we have to pick the relatively more prosperous areas. That's where we start, and then we go down. So in some ways, that's the way we started thinking about it. So this is why we did what we did. Let me then explain, the methodology with which we used. So, do you want to put something up on the next slide?
Does Sanjay have slides for?
Okay, I did have some pictures, but while that is coming on, let me explain that we started with census data. Now, why census data? Census data, as we all know, is sort of collected every 10 years in all these countries where census is, but it's universal. That is, census enumerators go house to house. They always have a long questionnaire and a short questionnaire, but they ask very specific questions, most of which include, where do you access electricity from, where do you, what type of house you have, et cetera, et cetera. So that's in some ways authenticated public source and therefore free data, and government data. I'll come to the importance of why government data in a minute, but so that's where we started from. So if you look at some of these pictures are complement, think about them as bottoms up to what Stuart is doing. So Stuart's first picture started with the international figures, and then he said national figures, and then he said subnational figures. Think of ours as exactly the other way around. Subnational, and then sub. So in any of these countries, you have the country, then you have the next administrative level, the province, and then the district. And so we start from the district level. And across this district, these are the darkest is above 90% households don't have access to electricity. So that's at one level of the market. But that's not the only criterion for the market. Companies like Ajaita's would sell these products using bank loans. So first thing to plot is where are the banks, the financial institutions. The next is to use where is the relative economic prosperity, and we use data like television penetration or motorized vehicles penetration. You could also use, for example, the type of houses. You could also use radios. But using appliances, radio and television are very important. Because, for example, if you are in Cambodia, the only reason people would buy solar home system is because they want to watch television. If you are selling smaller systems, say like Azuri in Kenya, then people would buy it because they can run a radio. So using these appliances is critical. Using data, penetration of these appliances. And you'll immediately see that the penetration of these appliances in many of these sub-districts is actually greater than the penetration of electricity. So that is kind of giving you a sense of where the market is. And then finally, you want to knock away the places where the grid is expanding, because the news of the grid coming is your biggest competition. And so where the grid is penetrating, the governments in whether Kenya, Tanzania, India, Bangladesh are very cagey to give out grid expansion data. But you can get an approximation by finding out in which sub-geographical areas the grid has expanded significantly in the last 10 years, and can knock those things off. And this is kind of one framework in which you can think about this analysis, about sort of sizing markets. Then you apply Stuart's data of finding out within this market what sites you can look at your microgrids and so on and so forth. So where all can you use this methodology? Obviously, you can use it in India because we've done this in India. But basically, you can use it in countries where census data is strong, and in some very interesting countries. For example, in East Africa, the Tanzanian census was finished in 2012. Our next sort of project is to do these maps in one East African country. Tanzanian census finished in 2012. The Rwandan census finished about a year back. The government of Rwanda has put in some excellent data out there on the website. The Ugandan census finished last year. Data is being tabulated and hopefully going to come up in a year down the line. Where all can you not use it? Good example is another East African country, that is in Kenya. Kenya, the census data is available 10 years, but after the census was done, they kind of remapped the whole country. So basically, the same administrative units don't exist anymore. So that's so you can apply this methodology with cognizance of senses and administrative units in each company. Finally, I end with just one comment, and that is the issue of marketing. If you're an investor in this space and you have raised $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, it's great. It's a great achievement. However, for launching a consumer product, $1 million is nothing, nothing. For test marketing any consumer product by any large company, $1 million is the test marketing budget. So the only way companies can scale is to pick a very small area and then spend all their marketing budget on that area. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sanjoy. Now, before we move to the next speaker, sorry, is that okay? So since both of your presentation, yours and Stuart's, are quite related, maybe you can be more specific and bring this closer to home. Can you talk about some case uses for investors and case uses for entrepreneurs, if you have any?
So two companies in India where we're working with this company. So one company is a company called Melinda, microgrid company, which actually used our analysis to spread to this state. So they work in West Bengal, which is on the eastern side, and then they wanted to pick a state on the next the next neighboring state, and they used our analysis to pick the districts where they would work in. From a practical perspective, apart from data, what is important, of course, is issues in these places is whether there is a certain amount of shall I say law and order issues. Then there is issue of where partners exist. So those are the practical considerations which this company then put on top of this data to shortlist from our analysis.
Stu?
A couple of examples. We've been working a little bit with Devergy in Africa, and they hand draw their mini-grid networks once they've GPSed all the houses. So they gave us one of their existing data sets and said, well, can you run your algorithm over that? So we mapped the households from satellite imagery, which was a very close match to their GPS work. And then we ran the minimum spanning tree algorithm over it, which with our layout was a 15% shorter length of wire to connect the same amount of households. Now there were certain reasons, the way with the topology of how they group households together with their equipment, that you couldn't necessarily do the least cost length, but there was still definitely some savings there that might have been possible. And with Power Hive, who you'll hear from this afternoon, they quickly developed in-house capability to do similar mapping after we helped them map about 25,000 households, which was far more than they've actually got electricity to so far. And I think that helped them a bit with a fundraising round of several $1 million. So I think, both at the operational level and at the planning, financing, raising level, doing some good preparation of where you seek to expand or what you're trying to design even tomorrow can be done quite quickly and cheaply.
All right, thank you. So basically what Sanjoy and Stuart covered is how technology can be used to reduce the scalability risk, expansion risk. Now we're going to move to how to reduce operations risk using technology. And for this, I'd like to invite Mr. Piyush Mathur from Simpa Networks. His topic is cost-effective expansion by leveraging technology. Piyush?
Morning, everyone. This is Piyush Mathur. I'm the CFO of Simpa Networks. Simpa, as some of you might know, sells solar as a service to energy-poor households and micro-enterprises in rural India. Our customers are typically off-grid or sometimes on-grid with very poor availability through the grid. Their monthly incomes are very variable and oftentimes less than $3 for the entire household every day. They are unbanked and outside the financial system as we traditionally know it. And one of the challenges in providing access to energy to these people is that you also have to couple it with access to finance. So in that respect, the problem of access to finance is intricately linked to the problem of access to energy. Now, how do you do that? To to make it affordable to them, you by definition then have to impose upon yourself as a service provider, whether that be us, whether that be another microgrid provider, a certain credit risk against the ability of those customers to pay over time. And because these customers are unrated, they do not have well-documented payment histories as many people in the urban world would. It's very difficult not only for developers like us, but also for financiers, so sitting one step behind us and asking us the question, but how do you know that these customers are ultimately going to pay? So we at Sempa have pioneered a technology solution to this problem, that how do you give confidence to us as developers as well as financiers behind us that the customers who we are signing up are ultimately going to pay. We call it a pay-as-you-go metering technology. What this technology does is convert an otherwise fixed monthly bank-style lending model, which anyway doesn't work for these customers with very variable income streams, into a completely flexible mobile-like top-up payment model, which is not only familiar to them because they all use mobiles, but also completely flexible. They can pay as much as they want when they want. Importantly, what this does is cut off the system when the credit or the top-up in the meter expires. So that creates a call to action for our customer to come back to us and buy more energy days worth of credit to keep running their system. In that way, we have an ability of enforcing payments, which we otherwise wouldn't, especially if you're servicing a very large distributed area. Earlier in the day, there was a discussion about the fractured universe that we're living in when it comes to access to energy. The holy grail for all of us in this room is to convince domestic lending banks to start financing these propositions, whether they be solar home systems, whether they be microgrids. That isn't going to happen unless we educate them and make transparent to them the underlying risk of payment from our customers. And what this metering technology does is actually make that risk transparent. So if you come to think of it, there are three advantages or three benefits of this technology. First, it enables credit to people who are unrated, whose credit histories are not understood, and who are out of banking system. Second, it reduces transaction costs. So instead of us having to go to such a large number of customers in a geographically distributed area, we get them to come to us, to our payment points, and make that payment to buy more energy days from us. And thirdly, it actually also enhances the customer benefit, because customers now have complete flexibility in how they want to pay, when they want to pay, and how much they want to pay, which no lending institution has been able to offer to date. So with these sort of flexibility, with this flexibility embedded in this proposition, and our ability to make credit risk transparent to lending institutions, we believe we have a good chance of mobilizing capital from commercial lending institutions, including domestic banks in the countries where we are operating. What we have experienced is that when we offer this flexibility to our customers, they actually pay us ahead of time. We are sitting here thinking that we're offering them flexibility so that they can pay us behind time, but what we do learn and realize is that actually they exercise that flexibility in a completely opposite way. The proposition of solar lighting and lighting at homes is so compelling for them, it's such a basic need that they often park money with us ahead of time, even when we are not rewarding them with any bank-style rates of interest. So that has been our experience. Happy to take more questions as we go into a dialogue. I was asked specifically not to have any slides because technology is a complex subject. And absolutely zero chance of telling you anything about technology if I use slides. Excuse me for that.
No problem. So Piyush, just one clarification. So clearly, because you're using energy metering to sort of pull in the payment systems and the monitoring systems of how much energy is used by the end user. You exert some level of control and you can get real-time data from your operations, right? And you mentioned that this helped you, or is in the process of helping you getting loans from commercial banks, which is the holy grail. So how far along are you in that process? Have you secured a loan from a commercial bank?
Well, we haven't succeeded in obtaining a bank from a stodgy Indian commercial bank yet. But what we have done is managed to give the same confidence to certain development finance institutions. So OPIC has given us a facility which we are now using to deploy solar home systems. We have also mobilized short-term working capital from an Indian specialist financial lender, again on the strength of this data and our ability to control payments. We are in active discussions with certain commercial banks in India where we operate about certain lending facilities to us. It's oftentimes a question of just getting them focused on this issue. If they spend enough time, they'll realize that this risk is no more than the risk that they take when they invest in large-scale thermal power plants, where there are layers and layers and layers of risk. Construction risk, development risk, operation risk, and then financing risk. But over times, because they have done it so many times, they have gotten comfortable with it. They're not at a point in their understanding of our access to energy space where they feel the same level of comfort with that risk. So we believe it's our job to take them through that education process and explain our risk and explain why they're not imposing themselves any more risk than they would be by investing in a thermal power plant. It's a different type of risk, but not more risk. So that's our big message. People or investors who have gone through that journey with us, like OPEC, have understood and taken that call. So they realize that in a thermal power plant, they'll be taking a very sort of binary risk, whether either the plant is working or is not working. If it's working, it's able to service its debt, or maybe not. If it's not working, it's not able to service its debt, period. But in our case, it's the exposure is so diversified and distributed that there is no scenario in which the entire cash stream gets compromised. So even in the worst of the situations, you'll have 80–90% of the customers still paying you. So I think it's going through that evolution and understanding which will unlock commercial financing for our sector, and that's what we have to persist through as a group.
All right, thank you. What Piyush talked about is how using technology can help you get data to optimize your operation. And in Simpa's case, it's not simple, but it's not as complex because they're just selling one product, which is electricity. Now the question is, if you're selling more than one product, how then do you use technology to sort of lower your distribution costs and optimize your supply chain? So on this topic, we invited Ms. Ajayita Shah from Frontier Markets to give us some insights. She's going to talk about embedding intelligence in the distribution system. Ajayita?
Thank you. So just a quick background. So Frontier Markets has been working in India, focused on last mile distribution of clean energy solutions as a product basket, ranging from lanterns to home lighting systems to power inverters to now getting into street lights and cook stoves. And we've focused on a retail model. So what we do is we work in rural villages. We create a market. We aggregate a different product basket. And then based on understanding of the customers, we create retail points or convert existing farmers and other existing retail shops into solar stock points. And then we provide after sales service through service centers or working with our partners on the ground. Our biggest motivator of wanting to look at this model specifically was that having spent a lot of time working in India through microfinance and other various means, I realized that while solar or other clean energy solutions is an obvious answer to the electricity inequity challenge, it hadn't quite scaled effectively at all. And trying to understand why, the realities were that either people didn't really understand the value proposition of what solar had to offer, It wasn't locally available. You couldn't go to your retail shop and buy a solar solution, even if you knew what it did and whether or not you wanted it. The affordability factor was definitely a challenge, but most importantly, trust. People didn't really believe that solar solutions was a good investment because they were exposed to either low quality products or products that might have been of high quality, but they didn't understand how to use it properly. So if it broke or stopped functioning to its maximum capacity, there was nobody present to actually service that product or handle them. So it was a really lonely decision if solar was going to be the solution, because there was no support there. And I think the after sales service and the local access piece is really what drove us to create this model. So what does after sales service mean then? It means that the person who's buying the product, you should know who they are, you should know what they're purchasing, you should know why they're purchasing it, you should understand all the 150,000 ways they'll probably misuse the product. And if by chance there's any sort of malfunctionality of the product, you should know immediately and be able to respond immediately so that the product gets serviced and the person that's invested in the solution doesn't feel duped or cheated. Now, that's very easy to do if you're working in the same city or you're working in the same village and you have either an insane infrastructure with millions of people that are monitoring every single product that you've sold and are able to respond fast enough to actually deal with that service, or it's essentially impossible, right? And so we've now created 500 retail points. We're working in 22 districts of Rajasthan, which is one of the largest states in India, and we've done 90,000 plus solutions. So tracking 90,000 people and being sure that you can service them and immediately respond to them effectively without using technology is crazy. And I think that's what actually motivated us. We said, you know, if we're true to actually wanting to service the product and we don't actually monitor the solution, we don't know how to reach our customer immediately, we can't even contact them to respond to their servicing need, we don't know anything about them, how are we gonna possibly do this? So that is where we started looking at, you know, what means we had present, and really it was a cell phone. So luckily, because of towers and because of mapping, there's a lot of telecom services in rural India, and people, at least every household has a cell phone. So what we've done is we've been essentially trying to get basic data of our end customer, which is their name, their phone number, the village that they live in, and then the product they purchase. And we use that information to essentially get in direct touch with our end customer through our call center. And the first step is to actually just connect with them, get more data by a real phone conversation, and then be able to guide them into the various different ways to prevent them from misusing the product. But then also let them know that if they have a servicing issue, that they can contact us. So initially, no one contacted us because they didn't actually believe that after-sale service was a reality. So we actually had to be proactive and started contacting them ourselves to let them know that there is a system in place. This allowed us to create an enormous database on all the different ways that even the highest quality products could be misused, and all the different ways that people misunderstand products, and why our entire marketing philosophy changed. So how we address the end customer, how we ensure that they use the product properly has changed based on our assessment of who that end customer actually was. Then we moved a little bit further into our model. When government started asking us, you know, it's great that you're selling lanterns and home lighting systems, why aren't you focusing on streetlights? And my biggest response to this minister was, you know, with all due respect, sir, I spent a very long time building a brand of trust, and the last thing I want to do is ruin that by creating a streetlight that no one takes accountability for. And so tomorrow, if the streetlight stops functioning and it's broken, it becomes the brand recognition of why solar is a failed technology in the eyes of a rural household. So they said, well, Ajita, if you had it your way, how would you create this model? Now, while technology can be a simple solution, it's not, because you still need local accountability. So what we did was we created a model based on after-sale service, but being able to monitor that solution. So we call this a Solar per Harry. But basically what it is we've created a hardware solution that links to our streetlights, which has a sensor and a GPS tracking system on it. And so what this sensor does is it looks at the whether the light is functioning, so its lumens, It looks at the battery capacity, and also it detects theft. So one of the biggest challenges always was, if someone stole a battery, then how is the light going to function, and what do you then do? So it's a security risk, insurance risk, branding risk, and at the end of the day, who suffers? It's that rural household. So our GPS tracking system functions for 12 hours after someone tries to steal the light. So in our laptop and on my phone, I can track every single street light I've ever installed in the last 3 months of all different parts of Rajasthan. And I can see the functionality of the light, I can see whether or not it's still present. And I get SMS information as well as satellite information now for all of my lights with a longitudinal, latitudinal understanding, but also the functionality. If something happens to the light and it's not functioning properly, I get like a yellow signal. That same signal goes to my local woman who's a responsible service provider in that village. So she gets informed. She on her phone has her own GPS tracking system, so I can tell whether she's responded to the service issue or not. As soon as there's a response and the problem is fixed, the light changes from yellow to green. If there's a red light, then we know there's theft, and we can track the light, and because it's within 12 hours, the person doesn't really run too far, and we can then allow the community to make a decision on what to do with the person that took the light. So it's been a really interesting way to be able to embed technology and rapid response, but also understanding the importance of why people still need to be there. So on an investor perspective, we've been able to convince some of the largest companies to now take on streetlights because they suddenly feel like there's an accountable system, because for the first time ever, you are calling your customer and letting them know that you want to service the product versus them chasing you. That's a really powerful message. Secondly, using technology, we've been able to really cut down our operational costs pretty significantly. The data that we've been able to track over the course of the last 4.5 years has given us insane confidence in terms of what products you want to introduce, which is why we started creating our own products. And so, when you suddenly start creating products that are designed with 90,000 plus data points, you're able to become very confident about creating customer-centric products that you can tell anyone that I guarantee you I can sell 50,000 pieces in a month of something, because we actually have the farmers ready and we have constant contact with them. So I think that really creates a different level of confidence in terms of being able to attract the right market.
Very interesting. Thank you. So basically, because of all this data, you are able to enforce accountability in the supply chain, and on the other side of the equation, you know enough information to actually design the products themselves. Have you advised manufacturers, for example, to tweak some of the designs so we can sell them in a better way?
Yeah, sure. So I didn't want to create this product, to be honest with you. I do enjoy distribution more than product creation, but our challenge was, so our first strategy was to work with our manufacturers and try to help them understand why small nuances of products, if they change, they can create a drastic difference. So this is a high beam Fox light torch. It has a 1 kilometer distance light. It's a focused light, and we had a product like this that we were selling with our manufacturer. The challenge with their product was they had a lead acid battery, so when you overcharged it, it would drain. So the functioning of the product died really fast, and there were a lot more after-sale service issues. And then the switch on the light itself wasn't waterproof. So when farmers have wet hands, they by default will create rust on the switch, which created, again, a lot of after-sale service issues. So we were looking at 70% responses for after-sale service to just replace a switch. And we tried working with the manufacturer to help them understand why a waterproof switch will create wonders. But because the product was so necessary, the numbers didn't decline, only our servicing costs went up, and they refused to make the changes the way that we needed to. So finally, we made a decision ourselves, and we said that, if you cannot work with the manufacturer and you see a clear-cut market and the data, can you actually then take that innovative risk yourself and do it?
Great, thank you. So on my watch, we have 15 more minutes for Q&A. So let me warm up the room once more and just take a stab at summarizing what we just discussed. So what Ajaita and Piyush, their technology basically enables clean energy companies to optimize their operation, thereby reduce their cost. Now, Stuart and Sanjoy's technology enables an efficient company, let's say you adopt Ajaita and Piyush's technology, to expand efficiently in a broader area because you know exactly what the market is there. So I think, in a way, it's very interesting that all your innovations are somehow interrelated. So one question I want to ask is, if you're based in Southeast Asia, let's say most of you are working in India, how can we access your platform? How can we adopt your technology? And how much would it be if I may be so bold?
We got two websites. www.developmentmaps.org is a house mapping service. The first 1,000 households is free for anyone who wants to use it. And at unmapper.developmentmaps.org is the atlas with the 500 GIS data layers and 2 million data points. There's a small password for that I can give out to anyone who wants it, and that's free. And they're global data sets, and any data sets that are missing that you'd like added, just let us know and we'll try our best. And if there's any public funders out here who'd like to see more growth of this, that'd be great. With Sanjoy's work, he's taken those different layers of information and said, okay, if I want this and that, you've got a multi-layer query, which has created static products of the PDF documents. But if we combine forces a bit, we'd be able to actually create an online dynamic multi-layer query that you could take any of the 500 layers and say, well, I want to know about the markets based on this multi-layer query. And that would allow anybody from any country to generate basically their own maps out of that sort of tool. So lots of exciting things to do, and I've been working with Ajay a little bit on the production side of things as well, and we can talk about solar blenders some other time.
So Simpa actually started operations 3 years ago, thinking that it's actually creating a solution for the entire off-grid market. But at that time, there weren't enough takers of the technology. I mean, to even effectively use the technology, you need a certain level of maturity in organizations to deploy it, maintain the routines surrounding the use of that technology, and those didn't exist at that time. And like Ajay illustrated, we had our own challenges in working with certain partners. Our hope and expectation is that as the industry matures and settles, there will be other beneficiaries of our technology, and we're very open to have that conversation. Just that it hasn't happened thus far.
I see. Sandra?
So thank you for the plug, Stuart. I think both Stuart and myself, the motivation is open source. We have already released our India methodology under Creative Commons license, which means that if you, for example, Sandeep Giri wants to implement it for Nepal, or somebody wants to implement it for Cambodia, you can use our methodology. And of course, if you want to understand the methodology in more detail, you want to have a look at the data sets and sort of adapt it to our methodology, it probably costs some services which Elevated for Call can pay for.
So I think what's interesting is that I think all of us, I don't think any of us set out to become technology solutions companies that were actually out to sell our software that we were creating. I think that we all embraced technology because we had no other options if we really wanted to scale our operations. So I didn't even think that I had a selling product until I went to NASCOM, and they were like, IT companies, they were all like, you need to productize this, you need to sell this. So what's become interesting for us is we've been kind of maybe similar to what actually you're doing, Piyush, is we're saying that, look, it's a hardware, it's a technology, it needs to go into the solar solution, and then we embed the costs of that into the actual solar solution. But is it a separate thing that we're actually selling out into the market or providing open source? It's just not anything that we've really thought about intensely.
All right. Good. So with that, I'd like to open the floor for questions. Yes, sir. Please feel free to approach the mic on either side of the room, and you may line up so that we can take questions one after the other. So let me take two questions first.
Okay. My name is Michael Nyango. I'm here from Kisumu County in Kenya. Very interesting. First question, have you heard of Ushahidi? Yes. So Ushaidi, for those of you in the room who may not know, is actually from Kenya, and it's an open platform that essentially crowdsources and crowd maps. And the next question that I want to ask is that, how is it that as governments that we can use your services and we can partner with you, to essentially move this away from just a conversation to actual things that can change lives of people? I think you all know Kenya in terms of, when it comes to, technology, we're really keen on using that in terms of changing lives. So what I'd like to know is, and Jason, I think that was really, I think all of you, it's really fascinating, but how do we then harness all this and literally take it and next week start implementing it and being able to see real change for people's lives? Thank you.
I think part of the question is related to the OpenStreetMap technology, and in particular, with OpenStreet mapping, there's a feedback mechanism, so making the map very current with what's going on. How do you see the challenges in the mapping technology used in terms of obsoleteness, right? So the map may say one thing, but then based on that you go to the field and you find something, the house may not be there, or certain assumptions that you made based on the map aren't quite there. So that's an issue you have to live with, right? Because that is what it is. But the feedback mechanism, somebody to say, hey, the map is not accurate, but let me kind of give you the information what I found on the ground, and do that in a crowdsourcing way, kind of like how OpenStreetMap does. I don't know if that technology is relevant or not, but I'd love to sort of hear your ideas on how do you create that feedback loop so that the entire practitioners in the market can benefit from a relevant or current map. Thanks.
Okay, so any takers?
I'll start with this question. A really relevant example of this is actually my experience with the Rajasthan government. So when they gave me free rein to think through what I wanted to do with streetlights, one of the things that I said to them is they have to shut down what they're currently doing, and they have to rethink the accountability structure as a part of the contract that they'd be giving to any vendor that comes in and installs solar streetlights in villages. And when they asked further, what does accountability mean? I said, well, how do you ensure that after sales service is maintained by someone who's installed a streetlight and that they don't run away? So this technology solution made that happen. And so now we're working with the Rajasthan government on adapting the software and the hardware for all of their solar streetlights that they're embedding in rural villages. So even if I'm not the one installing the streetlight, we're creating the software so they can actually make it mandatory for them. So whoever installs a streetlight needs to be able to adapt to this monitoring system so that they create accountability structures in a different way. So I think that, one is we need to start communicating with the government what their intentions are and what are some of the ground realities and challenges for why certain things haven't worked. And then, so you need to actually do that mapping exercise of, what do you need to, on a process perspective, change, and then show how the technology could solve that, right? So I think it's very doable. It just really depends on how much the government itself is willing to invest in rethinking their original strategy in going about with some of these solutions on the ground.
Can I? So thank you. Both these questions are wonderful. It just makes me feel proud to present in a session like this. On the first on Kenya, I think Shadi is a great company. Actually, I really wanted to engage with them and understand Kenya. I have not yet. So the first thing I'll do is grab your card after the session. On the way governments can use this, and this is, I think, it's such an important question to ask in this forum. And think about how governments in these countries work. Electricity is always typically sort of somewhere between or both the federal administration as well as the state level administration. In your case, the county as well as the central. And the central organization, Ministry of Power in most of these countries, are negotiating with the likes of ADB to fund a grid expansion project. So for example, in India, ADB has funded significantly large grid expansion projects, which is basically drawing lines to the grid. And then whether the grid electrifies households or not is not data that really comes back. Now, when you use census data, because it is government data, and I mentioned, this is very important, you can actually, sort of have authenticity within your government to say that in my county, which is at the federal level, so many households don't use electricity, and therefore the money that is spent by the Ministry of Power for grid expansion should be replaced by decentralized sources which can connect households to the grid tomorrow as opposed to 2 years later. And that's, I think, the way the data needs to be used.
Thank you. Stu?
I take a slightly different approach and avoid the government altogether. As a very simple task flow for developing a project, and I get requests coming in pretty regularly about this, but don't have sufficient capital to meet those requests, is to start with a latitude and longitude. Tell us a village that you're interested in. If you don't know which village or area of Kenya to work with, then look at the resources of people that you do know up country who are off grid, and it's usually pretty quick to find somebody who is in one of these off-grid markets. Then we can map the households in the general area to get a spatial understanding of whether we should be looking at a charging station or a mini grid or individual solar home systems, which really comes down to the simple case of house-to-house distances. If they're really close together, you can make a grid. If they're not, you can't. And then to look at the technology options. So there's good summarising websites out there about which technologies are available. I helped create a subsidiary called Smart Solar in my Barefoot Power days in Kenya. So that's one possibility, but there's a growing list of many more opportunities at the moment. I've got some toys in my bag if you want to have a look at some of them. Some of them have pay-as-you-go technology, a lot of them don't, but slowly we're starting to see pay-as-you-go being available to companies other than those who develop the technology, who can embed it into other systems. But it's very early days in that so far. And then comes the tricky bit of the finance. So for me, stick it on Kiva is the quickest way to get early stage financing. So get a profile together, a photo, tell the story of the village, whack it up there, it'll probably be funded within hours. And thanks to Kiva for 0% 5 to 7 year loans. Usually they're 1 or 2 or 3 years, but they can go up to 5 or 7 years. And there is no other capital like that in the market at the moment. So well worth the effort of taking a photo, making a profile, and getting it up there.
To the other question, and this is actually a question to both of you. So could we actually give you updated information if we were in a village and I looked at your map and I realized it was incorrect?
Absolutely. So to answer that question, we looked at OpenStreetMaps software, and I took one look at it and shit myself. It's kind of complicated. So what I didn't want was there to be any sort of learning curve whatsoever. So we rewrote a simple OpenStreetMaps sort of software program where the only thing you can do is click on households. There's absolutely nothing else you can do. And so we sent that software out to low-cost Filipino workers. There's a guy a few cities away who does a lot of mapping. We ended up having 5 or 10 for some World Bank jobs that mapped 300,000 households in Nepal. And they just clicked on any house they could see. And that generated the latitude and longitude from the code. And that's all it did. So that data was completely new data. It never existed before. But if that data was wrong, then we're more than happy to get updated versions of that. And updating data sets in GIS is pretty standard part of GIS data management. So it is a very interactive process between the initial desktop study and then what you find out from the field. So you can't, and you certainly can't see power lines from satellite imagery. So we don't know where the off-grid areas are specifically just from satellite imagery. So we do need field data to be able to tell us, because the departments of energy never do. So.
Great. So we just have time for one more question, if there are any takers, and then we'll close for lunch. Any questions from the audience? All right. So please join me in thanking our panelists. Now, let me just try to bring the two sessions we just had together. So the first session, we talked about how we encourage investors to assume more risk, thereby encouraging more investment in clean energy. And here we talked about how we reduce the operations risk of companies to bring them to the risk preference of investors. So by working on both ends, the project development facility, which Jiwan presented earlier this morning, attempts to facilitate some of the private sector investment required to achieve universal energy access. Now, just to bridge to the session we're going to have after lunch, we had a session for investors, which we are serving. We have a session for clean energy companies, which we are also serving. Now, as the SE4All Asia Pacific Hub, we are also opening up a new suite of services for the government. And the third session will talk about that, how far we've gone and what we need to do to be more efficient. So micro and then later on macro level.